The anniversary that revealed my wife's secret. Hey, my name's Jake, and I'm like 35. For the last 7 years or so, I thought my life was pretty solid. I had a great job, a nice place to live, and best of all, I was married to Rachel. She's 33, hot as hell, smart, and the life of every party. We had what I thought was a strong marriage, or so I thought. Until our 7th anniversary, the night everything went downhill. It started a few weeks before, when Rachel started acting weird. She was all distracted and kinda distant. Every time I asked her if something was up, she'd brush it off, say it was just stress from work. I wanted to trust her, but my gut was telling me there was something else going on. But I still wanted our anniversary to be great, so I booked a surprise vacation. I thought maybe we could spark some romance. When the day finally came, I was filled with excitement and anticipation. Everything was ready, the flowers, the reservation at her favorite restaurant, and the tickets for the cozy cabin in the mountains. I could just imagine her reaction when I told her about it. But as the hours went by, Rachel still didn't show up. That excitement started to fade away a bit. It was 7 p.m, and she still wasn't there. I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted her multiple times, hoping for some sort of response, but nothing. Around 9 p.m, I was pacing back and forth in the living room, getting more and more anxious. Then suddenly the door opened, and there she was. Rachel walked in, her hair a mess, and her cheeks flushed. But she didn't seem like the same person I had been expecting. The smell of alcohol and perfume wafted towards me, making my heart drop in fear. "Where were you, man?" I asked, trying to keep my cool, but the worry was already turning to anger. Rachel gave me a startled look, like she wasn't expecting to see me up and about. "Oh, just hanging out with some friends, she said with a wave of her hand. "Lost track of time, I wanted to believe her, I really did. But something about the way she was saying it didn't feel right. Something seemed off about the whole thing, and deep down, I knew what was probably going on. But I wasn't ready to face the truth just yet. "Who were these friends of yours, anyway?" I asked with a tight feeling in my chest. She paused, and that was all I needed. "It's just, people from work," she stammered. But her eyes were avoiding mine, and then it hit me, it wasn't work people. It was someone else, Mark, her old friend. He was at the wedding. I'd even bought him a drink, totally oblivious to what was going on. "Mark?" My voice shook. Rachel froze, wide-eyed like a deer in headlights. There it was, the confirmation I didn't want to hear. She didn't have to say anything more. I saw it in her face, the way her body tensed. It was him. I took a deep breath, processing the whirlwind of emotions. Anger, shock, pain all hitting me at once. After 7 years, on our wedding day, she was with Mark. "Jake, it's not what it looks like," she said quickly, her words sounding empty, like she didn't even believe them herself. I just stared at her, my heart racing in my chest. "Then what is it, Rachel? What happened tonight?" I asked, hoping for the truth. Maybe she'd finally come clean and tell me it was all a mistake. Instead, she just stood there, tears forming in her eyes, but no words coming out. In that moment, I knew everything. Our 7th anniversary, the night we were supposed to be closer, had turned into the night that broke us apart. After our anniversary, it felt like I was in a different world. Everything was the same on the outside. Rachel and I still lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, but there was this tension between us. It was like there was an elephant in the room, a heavy, unspoken truth that we couldn't ignore. That night, I decided to confront Rachel about Mark. I asked her directly, but she didn't give me a clear answer. Instead, she just cried and apologized. At first, I tried to ignore the feeling, to tell myself that maybe it wasn't as serious as it seemed, that maybe she'd had too much to drink and it was all a misunderstanding. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the doubt that had taken root in my mind. The trust one had in Rachel, The trust I'd thought was strong and unbreakable had been shattered. Whenever I looked at her, I saw Mark. A week went by, and we hadn't talked about it. I guess Rachel thought if we just didn't talk about it, we'd move on and forget about it. But I couldn't forget. Every night I'd lie awake, replaying that night in my head, wondering what had happened between her and Mark. It was driving me crazy. It wasn't until Saturday that I lost it. We were in the kitchen, Rachel scrolling through her phone, and me staring at my coffee. The tension between us thick. I don't remember how it started. Maybe it was something small, like her complaining about her late nights, or me complaining about my absences. Either way, things escalated fast. All the anger and frustration and betrayal came out. "Are you ever going to tell me what happened?" I yelled, slamming my coffee mug down on the table. Rachel flinched, but her face quickly hardened. "What are you talking about, Jake?" she said. "I told you it was nothing." I laughed bitterly. "Nothing? Staying out all night with Mark on our anniversary is nothing? Come on, Rachel, do you think I'm an idiot?" She looked at me, guilt and defiance flashing in her eyes. "I didn't want things to happen that way," she said quietly. It just did. My heart was pounding as I stared at her, wondering what exactly had happened. Rachel looked away, hands trembling as she put her phone down. We were silent for a moment, and my anger started to build. I wanted to grab her and demand answers, but instead I waited, silently. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't mean to hurt you." Tears filled her eyes at the words. No excuses, no explanations, just those 3 words, "I'm sorry." "What did you think would happen, Rachel?" I shouted, my voice getting louder. "You think sleeping with your so-called friend on our anniversary wouldn't affect me? You think I wouldn't know?" "I was drunk," she replied, her voice shaking. "It wasn't planned. I wasn't in the right mind. So what, it happened and that's it," I said, coldly. "I just forgive you and forget? You expect that? No, not happening." She covered her face and started crying. I wanted to be sympathetic, but I was mad. It wasn't about the act itself. It was more about the betrayal. She picked him over me on our special day. "Jake, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. I laughed, but it was bitter. "Nice way to show it," I replied. We sat there for hours in silence, neither of us talking, just the sound of her crying and my own thoughts, trying to process everything that had happened. The weight of her betrayal was crushing me, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her. Eventually, Rachel stood up, wiped away her tears, and said, "I need some time to think. I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days." With that, she walked out, leaving me alone in the quiet house that suddenly didn't feel like home anymore. As I sat there, staring at the spot where she'd been, it all hit me at once. It wasn't just what she'd done, but all the years we'd shared, all the memories we'd made, and how in an instant, she'd torn them all apart. I didn't lose just my wife that night, I lost our future too. Rachel's absence was supposed to be a relief, a chance to catch my breath and clear my head, but it was like a ton of bricks had landed on me. Everywhere I looked, everything reminded me of Rachel and our life together. The pictures on the walls, souvenirs from trips, little notes we'd leave each other, they were all just haunting me. For the first few days, I did my best to pretend it wasn't happening. I worked crazy hours, took on extra projects, stayed late at the office until I was too exhausted to think. But when I finally crawled into bed, the silence was deafening. My mind raced, replaying that day over and over again. I wondered if I'd missed the signs, if I was just too blind to see the cracks in our relationship. I didn't have anyone to talk to. My friends were just people I hung out with, and they looked at me with pity when they found out the truth. That wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want everyone to feel sorry for me, so I tried to keep everything to myself. Then, a week after she left, my phone rang late one night. It was Rachel. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stared at her message for a long time. My heart was racing with a mix of emotions, angry and scared. What did she want to say? How could she make things better? I didn't reply right away, telling myself I didn't care. But I did care deep down. A part of me wanted answers. I wanted her to tell me what was going on and make sense of everything. After pacing around the room for an hour, I finally picked up the phone and responded. "Where are we going?" she asked immediately. "Our usual place." She meant Sullivan's Diner, of course. We used to go there when we first started seeing each other. It was our special place, where we had shared so many memories that I couldn't count. The thought of meeting there made my stomach flip, but I agreed anyway. Maybe it was time for us to finally have a talk and get some things sorted out. I arrived first and slid into our usual booth by the window. It was quiet inside, with only a few regulars scattered around. No one paid me much attention as I waited for Rachel. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say when she finally walked in. She looked different. Her hair was in a ponytail, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. The usual sparkle in her eyes was gone. She seemed tired and worn down, as if the past few days had taken a toll on her too. For a second, I almost felt bad for her. She slid into the booth across from me, giving a small, uncomfortable smile. "Thanks for coming," she said softly, fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure what to say. Seeing her still stirred up something inside me. But it wasn't love like I once felt. It was something else, something colder. Rachel looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I'm not sure how to start," she said after a long silence. "Maybe we should start with the truth," I said, my voice sharp. She winced, but nodded. "You deserve that," she whispered. "You deserve to know everything." I crossed my arms and leaned back, waiting for her to continue. "So, tell me," I said. She paused, took a deep breath, then started again. "Mark, and I didn't plan this. I promise, Jake. It just happened. Nothing in life happens by chance, Rachel. We make our own choices." Her eyes were brimming with tears, but for once, I didn't feel sympathetic. "It all started a few months ago," she admitted in a tiny voice. "We got back in touch. He was having a rough time with his girlfriend, and I don't know. I let my guard down, I guess." "Few months," I echoed, my stomach sinking. "So it wasn't a one-night stand." She shook her head guiltily. "No, it wasn't. But it didn't mean I didn't want to hurt you, Jake. I know that sounds bad, but it just sort of happened." I snorted, my hands balling into fists under the table. "Didn't want to hurt me? Then why didn't you end it? Why didn't we talk if something was up?" Rachel sniffled, brushing away her tears. I was so confused. I had no idea what to do. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. "Break up?" I interrupted. "Were you planning to leave me for him?" She didn't respond right away, and the silence was so loud, it was like a punch to the gut. I felt like she had just stabbed me in the heart. All those nights she came home late with excuses about work, they were all lies. She wasn't just being unfaithful. She was thinking about leaving me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. "After all these years." Rachel looked down at her hands, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Because I don't want to lose you." I stared at her. This woman I loved so much. The woman who was willing to throw our relationship away for what? A short fling that burned out in just a few months. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her or trust her again. "You already have," I finally said, standing up from the table. Rachel's eyes went wide with surprise, but I left without waiting to see her response. I walked out of the diner and let the door slam shut behind me, leaving her there alone. Walking out of the diner, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. As the cool night air hit me, I realized I was free, but it wasn't the kind of freedom that made me feel good. It left me feeling empty and unsettled. Rachel had been so much a part of my life, and I didn't know who I'd be without her. We'd been together for so long, and after what she did, I just couldn't be with her anymore. I drove home, feeling a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief, all swirling around inside me. But none of it held me back. I just kept driving. When I pulled up to my house, it was empty. The lights were off. The house was quiet. It was so weird to be home alone after years of coming back to Rachel waiting for me. Sometimes with a smile, other times with that annoyed look we got after arguing. But now it was just me. The silence wasn't comfortable, it was suffocating. I wandered around the empty house, my steps echoing through the silent rooms. Everything reminded me of Rachel and our life, which had come to an end. I thought about calling a friend for some support, but I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to talk about everything and hear their pity. So I made myself a drink and sat down on the couch, staring at the blank TV. Then my phone started ringing. At first, I thought Rachel was trying to reach out with a last-ditch message, but it wasn't her. It was Mark. I was so nervous when I saw his name pop up on my screen. What does he want? I was tempted to ignore it, but my curiosity won over. When I finally opened the message, it said, "Jake, listen, I don't know what Rachel told you, but I need to talk to you man to man." I felt so angry. After all he's done, he wants to talk. I tossed my phone away, not wanting to give him any attention. He doesn't deserve it, not after how he messed up my marriage and life. But as time passed, my anger started to cool down, and I started thinking, what could he possibly have to say that Rachel hasn't already said to me? Is he going to admit to something else, or try to blame someone else like it's okay? Against my better judgment, I grabbed my phone again and typed, "What do you want?" A few minutes later, his response came back. "I want to tell my side of the story. Can we talk?" I wasn't really sure why I said yes to meeting with Mark. Maybe I was just curious, or maybe I needed some closure, or maybe there was still so much anger boiling inside me that I had to get it out. Whatever it was, I replied to his text and set up a place and time for the next day. It wasn't my best decision, but I felt like I had to hear what he had to say and try to understand why he did what he did. The next day, we met up at a downtown bar that Rachel and I don't usually go to. It's kind of gritty and loud, which is exactly why I picked it. I didn't want to be reminded of our past while I faced the person who destroyed it. When I got there, Mark was sitting at a table in the corner, looking nervous. He was fidgeting with his drink and checking the door every now and then. When he saw me, he stood up and gave a little smile. "Hey, Jake, Save it," I said, sitting down in front of him. "Just get to the point." Mark's smile disappeared and he nodded, also sitting down. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, and his hair was all messed up. For a second, I felt a bit of satisfaction seeing him that way, like he hadn't escaped the consequences of what he'd done. "Listen," he started. "None of this was my intention. Rachel and I had been friends for a long time, but things got complicated. You think that excuses anything?" I asked coldly. "You think complicated justifies cheating on my wife?" He quickly said, No, I don't mean to excuse myself. I just wanted you to know that it wasn't my intention." I gave a bitter laugh. "Funny, she said the same thing to me." Mark winced at what I said, running a hand through his hair. "Man, I don't know what Rachel said to you, but it wasn't about that, I swear. She was just going through a lot. She was so confused and didn't know what she wanted." He clenched his fists under the table, trying to calm down. "And then you thought you knew better than me and tried to help her out behind my back?" "I know I messed up, man. I know I screwed up big time, but Rachel, she was lost. Jake, she needed somebody and I was there for her." I finished his sentence, my voice dripping with anger. He didn't try to defend himself, just sat there, defeated. Neither of us said anything for a minute. The sounds of the bar, clinking glasses, muffled laughter, conversations, filled the silence. My heart was racing, anger threatening to take over. "I don't know, man. What do you want me to do?" I said, finally. "You already took everything from me. What else could you possibly want?" Mark sighed and leaned forward, his face full of desperation. "I just want things to be okay again. I know it's not going to bring back what happened, but I don't want you to hate me forever. This can't be the end of everything." I stared at him. The man who betrayed me was sitting there, asking for forgiveness. It was kind of funny, really. He wanted to get off the hook and move on without any guilt. But I just wasn't there yet. "I can't just let it go, man," I said softly. "It's way too late for that." He didn't try to stop me when I turned and walked away. As I left the bar, it hit me. Maybe I wouldn't ever forgive them or myself for what happened. But it didn't really matter anymore. They weren't a part of my life anymore. It was time to move on alone. The drive home from the bar was pretty chill. The street lights were flashing through my windshield like ghosts from my past. I kept replaying every word Mark had said, all his pathetic excuses and weak apologies in my head. He wanted me to forgive him, but I just wasn't ready yet, maybe not ever. When I got home, it was dark and silent, weighed down with memories I didn't want to think about. I kicked my shoes off and stood in the hallway, listening to the quiet. For the first time in a while, the silence wasn't overwhelming, it felt final. Over the next few days, I was really thinking about that conversation I had with Mark about Rachel. All that had happened in the last few weeks was still weighing on my mind. I was still feeling angry, betrayed, and hurt. But there was something else too, a quieter feeling, like the first signs of calm after a storm. It was weird, realizing that even though I wanted answers about why things had gone wrong, nothing could change that they had. After our dinner conversation at the restaurant, Rachel didn't come back. She sent me a few texts asking how I was doing and if we could talk, but I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because there was just nothing more to say. All the trust we'd built over the years was shattered, and I wasn't sure it would ever be the same. Maybe we'd talk again someday, but for now, I needed some time to figure out where I stood without her. So, a couple of weeks later, out of the blue, I got a call from the lawyer about Rachel's divorce papers. It wasn't a shock, but seeing it all in black and white, hearing it from someone else's mouth, made it seem more real than it had before. Our marriage was officially over. That night, I went around the house, picking things to pack up and get rid of. Photos, souvenirs, and memories of our time together were all piled up. Instead of feeling angry or sad, I approached it with a sense of determination. Packing those things was just a step towards moving on. It was hard. Every item I picked up meant something. A photo from our trip to the Grand Canyon, tickets to our first concert, little notes we'd leave each other on the fridge. But as I put them away, something changed inside me. Those things were just things. They weren't who I was. They didn't control me anymore. A few days later, Rachel's sis came to pick up some of her stuff. We said hi and small talk, but didn't really talk much. She didn't ask about Rachel, and I didn't volunteer any info. After she left, the place felt even emptier, but it was kind of a relief too. I could breathe without Rachel hanging over everything. That first weekend, I took a long drive without a specific destination. Just wanted to be out on the open road with wind blowing through my windows and tires humming on the asphalt. That used to help clear my head and think about life. But this time I wasn't thinking about anyone but myself. Who am I now, with everything changed? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out step by step, day by day. The affair hurt me in ways I'm still figuring out. It didn't break me though. When I got home that night, something felt different about the house. It was no longer just an empty space. It was like a fresh start. I could paint the walls whatever color I wanted, move the furniture around, and decorate it however I pleased. Maybe someday someone else will share this place with me, but for now, it's just mine and that's good enough. A few months later, things started to get back to normal. I focused on work, catching up with old friends, and taking better care of myself. I wasn't in a rush to find someone new. I just needed some time to breathe and figure out what I wanted. I went to a diner one day that we used to go to with Rachel. It was a bittersweet reminder of our past, but I didn't want to dwell on it. There was nothing left for me there, so I kept driving. That chapter was over, and I needed to move on. As I drove away from the scene, the sun was sinking in the distance, and something just hit me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad or heartbroken. Rachel and Mark were just a part of the past, and they didn't have to define my future anymore. There was this whole new life waiting for me, and for the first time in ages, I felt positive. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew I was ready to move on and start anew. This time, I was in charge. If you like such stories, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. It will be the biggest support for me.